In this episode, we present our argument for the objective truth of ethics. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shannon Ray, and I'm joined by my special guest, Ryan Scott. And this is our third episode of the fourth season, in which we are trying to establish the objective truth of ethics. And by virtue of the objective truth of ethics, we establish the objective truth of evil, which is like something that subverts the ethics. And in the previous two episodes, we've been focusing on the concept of identity because within our ethical framework, we are establishing ethics firmly in terms of relationship with others. And we're trying to establish the nature of identity and how it's manifested through relationships. So in the previous two episodes, there's certain ideas that we've been using. So what are the ideas that we've been using? One, we start off with what we call the meta level zero data, which are things like the nomentation without representation principle. And the example I always use is the idea that if I tell you a secret, you can get up into another room and tell someone that secret, which means I had to program you like a computer, like that information to be stored on your physical system like a memory card. And so what that means is that when we're communicating with each other, we are literally programming each other. And that makes us move in the space of physical configurations that our system can be placed in, and that different physical configurations are there has a relationship with different modes of being. So if someone comes to you if someone comes to you and tells you that your mother died, then you're going to go from the state prior to hearing that to the state after hearing that, and that change in physical configuration is associated with a different mode of being. And so with that understanding, we then have the concept of something like spirit or one spirit, which is related to how one programs the universe, or how something programs the universe, and how it's programmed by the universe. And so as you are interacting with others in your environment, you are moving through the space of configurations, which then changes to your physical state, then changes how you interact with others. And so your spirit changes based off of the change of your physical configuration. And these changes can be observed based on your observed behavior. And so as you're navigating the space of configurations, you're also navigating the space of possible spirits that you can embody. And so far, before I continue, Ryan, do you have anything to say? Sound good so far?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
So I'm laughing because Ryan's very precise thinker, so I like watching him double check my math. Anyway, so in this idea, so now I'm going to make a rehash an argument.
Sorry, I do.
Oh yeah.
I want to add. I mean, I always want to emphasize this point that we should always be careful about universalization. So, in the context of the construction that you present, it is. I don't have any disputes with the nature of the construction.
Yeah.
What I want to say is that the key point that we're trying to emphasize in the context of this discussion is there is a natural relationship between the way we conceptualize the world and the way that we embody ourselves within the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we can infer an individual's conceptualizations based on the manner in which he embodies himself.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we could even assert strongly that what he believes about himself in the world necessarily must manifest itself in his behavior.
Yep.
And that I think we should probably go as far to say that if he says he believes something, but he acts in a manner that is contradictory with what he says, then really what he believes is the thing that he is doing, or the thing
Yes.
that can be inferred based on what he's doing.
Yes, something like
And
that. Yeah.
I think the reason why this is so important is because it implies that like there is such a thing as integrity, and that consists in the degree to which your conceptualization of yourself and the world is aligned with the manner in which you behave,
Yes. Yes.
right? And I think it was the previous it was the previous episode where we were talking about the greater degree to which you embody the set of behaviors which are characteristic of a particular identity is the degree to which you can identify with that particular identity,
Yes. Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so then we can perform an abstraction here, and instead of thinking about a particular identity, we can talk about like that which you are as such, and in particular, like if there is such a thing as what if there's such a thing as there being some transcendental or objective personality that you were given when you were born or something like that, like usually
Yeah.
what religious people regard as a soul,
Yeah.
then the degree that then you have the capacity to be aligned or misaligned with it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so um, the importance of this is that if there is if that thing exists, then the plausibility or the possibility of the existence of something like an objective ethic becomes an admissible question.
Well, it's part of
Um,
it. I think that so actually so I would like to say that what you're saying I think is an extension of my perception or my conceptualization of the objective ethics that I didn't have prior to interacting with you. And I think can be incorporated into what I believe and I in the previous episode did that. So you actually were introducing a new way of perceiving ethics in this idea of the name God gave you that I hadn't previously done.
yeah.
And so one of the things that I want to say as you're pointing out the importance of everything I rattled off at the beginning of the episode um, is that it's all based on observation. So that's why I always say spirit is related to or is associated with how you program the universe and how you're programmed by the universe. It's kind of an encapsulation of the
Um,
idea, but an encapsulation of the idea of you'll know them by their fruits. So you're trying to know, so
yep.
whenever you're interacting with somebody, you're asking, who am I interacting? Who is this? And there's certain modes of being, certain spirits that can be embodied, like the deceiver. Am I interacting with the deceiver right now? And you need to know that, otherwise you're screwed. So part of this person's identity becomes, oh, don't listen to that person, he's a liar, he's a deceiver, he has that spirit, and I know this based off of all these things that he's done, don't trust him. And so this is what we're dealing with. And the last part of this argument that I wanted to make is this idea of the eternal spirit. So I make this argument in the second season episode called Archetypes and Eternal Spirits, which archetype might not be the correct word based off of interacting with Ryan, but that's the name of the episode. Where I make the argument that every observed configuration of the universe is valid, um is consistent with the laws of physics. So when I say as a physicist, I say to be a physicist is to conceptualize reality using the symmetries of the universe, which is to say that when we construct a physical theory, what we're saying is that when the universe goes from state A to state B in a physical interaction, that there is something that's conserved, or there's a symmetry there that's conserved during that interaction. And then we use that to create equations so that we can take in the input data and predict the output data. And so every configuration that you observe in the universe has to be consistent with the laws of physics. And so every spirit that can be embodied, like the deceiver that can be observed, is an eternal, assuming that the universe, there is a true symmetry and there is an eternal non-changing nature to the universe. I don't know if it's like bleeding or something like that. Maybe it's just changing at a rate that's so large we can't tell. But
Um,
assuming that, what's that?
well, so even those caveats don't really matter,
Mm-hmm.
specifically because uh, even if you require there to be changes, you can like think at one level higher and say,
Yeah.
okay, well, even if I'm requiring there to be changes, if I'm considering like the segment of time or the segment of space time that we are in, it is manifestly true that this configuration must hold in this.
Time scale or something.
I mean, it needs to hold. It's just like this. Like, even if the Earth is a transient object, it's definitely true that the circumstances which produce the configuration of the Earth right now, that must be an eternally valid thing,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise the Earth wouldn't be able to exist. Right. So the
Yeah.
circumstances that admit the capacity to be a deceiver in the context of a social setting among human beings, that is an eternally valid configuration under the constraints that we're considering, like the things that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And the
Exactly. Yes.
reason
Yes.
why it's eternally valid is because but its own construction is its proof. Like, if it were not a valid configuration, it would not be able to manifest.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
so
Yeah.
we don't even need to put in the caveats.
Yeah, I only put those caveats in because I haven't thought through the details, and it's only my imagination that someone could come in from there. So I put the caveats in
No,
just
no,
as a.
no. I mean, there is no possible way. There's no possible way to deny that, because what you would need to do is you would need to deny the possibility of the existence of something like a deceiver in a social setting under the constraints of what it is to be human. But we already know, by virtue of the fact that those people behave that way, that is sufficient, necessary and sufficient condition
Okay.
for the
Well.
proof of the existence of that thing. So there is no objection.
Okay.
and
Great.
I would say that this isn't even necessarily my argument. This is Kant's argument in his critique of pure reason.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I love that then. So I will no longer add that caveat, or I'll investigate more to understand that deeply. But the point is that with the point of physics is that we're predicting the future based off of this idea of something being symmetric, and so and the argument that I made in the archetype of the internal spirits is something like the spirit of Shannon, the thing that's talking to you now, or the spirit of Oyani, is a valid configuration. It's like it's an eternal valid configuration of the universe. In that it is obviously a valid configuration. So the laws of physics create a demarcation between the space of configurations that are valid versus ones that are not valid. And so when you are trying to navigate this space of configurations that I established, this when you're navigating your space of configurations, you're navigating the space of spirits that can be embodied, or kind of like being pulled down into and realized in a physical way. And so these are all meta level zero observations. Everything that we're saying is related to this idea of the laws of physics and how they work. And so there's this idea of eternal spirits that can be embodied. Everything is based off of how something interacts. So you can look at its fruits to see, okay, who am I interacting with right now? What spirit is this? And so that establishes the notion of identity that we need to then extend the truth of those meta level observations to the idea of ethics. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of a recap of what we've been doing up until this point. Yeah. So um, yeah, and so in the previous episode, the idea of identity, and maybe we don't have to rehash the whole thing. You can just go back and listen to it. But we started establishing the idea of macro identities versus micro identities, and the idea that your identity doesn't belong to you alone. These different modes of being that can exist, like for instance, the spirit that can do calculus. I can identify with that spirit. I'm a physicist. I'm a mathematician. You can identify with that spirit, but someone else can study and embody that spirit as well. And so think of mathematician as one identity that I have, and that's a macro identity. And then you can think of when you're trying to point to Shannon in the space of spirits, you take the set of all of his macro identities. He's a father, he's a male, he's a scientist, all of the things that point to me instead of pointing to Ryan. Those are all my macro identities. You can take those and you can see how each one of those can exist in somebody else. And so I can say something like, I when I see another mathematician, I see myself over there. And so because these different configurations or blueprints or waveforms, whatever you call them, can be placed on different physical matter, then you can see the degree to which that self is um it's something that is not local only to you but exists within others. And then also you have this idea of whatever spirit is associated with scientists. It's something like, even if I'm not interacting with Ryan, if I want to embody that spirit, I have to follow its rules. I have to obey its laws, and I have to take actions that keep me closer to it, that keeps my configuration closer to it, such that I can continue to do calculus. It's like boxing. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yep.
Things like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this
So,
is yeah. Oh, anyway, go ahead.
I was just going to say eh, just I want to continue to reiterate this point
Hmm.
because it's always a possibility that if somebody deals with the name scientist and then varies the underlying meaning of the thing,
Yeah.
then the thing that you get closer to that, like imagine your behavior is in alignment with one interpretation of the sense of scientist,
Yeah.
and then somebody comes along and then varies that radically, then your behavior is no longer in line with what they are calling scientist. Your
Yes.
behavior is in line with something else.
Yes.
Okay. But your behavior is still in line with what your interpretation of a scientist was previously.
Yeah.
So if we um, focus on the thing that you are aligning with, independent of what you call it,
Yeah.
then that becomes an objective process that is independent of naming.
Yes.
And then you can speak meaningfully and in an objective way the degree to which you are aligned with it, assuming we have the capacity to conceptualize a set of behaviors that characterize this thing, regardless
Yes.
of who or what is trying to align with that thing, right? Like, so,
Which is to say, I think you can summarize it in that even if you change the labels, the behavior doesn't change.
yeah,
And
that's right.
so yeah, and so
Yeah,
that's the
and
core of it.
yeah, and I think that this is a very, very essential. I mean, there are important caveats here because, um, like, it might not be like you have to worry about whether or not you can conceptualize this thing prior to its naming. And you have to worry about whether or not you have the capacity to intuit this thing to a sufficiently coherent degree that you can construct behavior that aligns yourself with it, even in the absence of its name.
Hmm.
Now, my personal opinion is that you can do that, and that's the significance and meaning of the Spirit in Christianity, of the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
right? I don't need, and it's also the position of the Catholic Church for that matter. Like, there are individuals who, as long as they behave sufficiently in line with what is typically called like your conscience, you aren't necessarily damned to hell, even if you haven't been baptized. Okay.
Mm, mm.
So,
Okay, that's really
but
interesting. Yeah.
the reason why I want to put so much weight and emphasis on the process rather than the naming
Yeah.
is it because, uh, like, well, first of all, one of the core reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing right now is because people are taking the names and pretending like they can just move those things around,
Hmm.
and because they're really they're playing the game of, let me just vary the meaning and keep the name, and then pretend like all
Yeah.
of the associations people have with the name
Yep.
persist,
Yep.
so that I can start to shame people when they behave in a way that's consistent with the previous meaning of the term.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, so this is going to go into our notion of evil. It is
Yep.
literally the act
Is
of
deception per
put.
se.
Yes,
I
you're
mean,
putting on
it's
the
like a
mask.
betrayal. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're putting on the mask of the thing, but while the spirit of you're hollowing out the spirit that's
Yep.
associated with the name.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a really true act of evil, because and then it starts to confuse people who start
Yeah.
to think, oh, look at what this thing is doing, and they don't know that, no, there's a deceiver that's hollowed out the spirit,
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
on a mask, and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
claiming to be that, and that's
Yeah.
core
Yeah.
to the idea of evil.
Yeah,
Um,
there's actually there's an internal contradiction in that mode of conceptualization because I mean, this is just a technical point. You need to simultaneously believe that the only thing that characterizes the meaning of something is its extensionality, which is like the way that it's used or the way that
mm,
it constructs things, while also affirming that what you're going to do is you're going to vary the intentionality or the underlying meaning of the thing in order to transform its extensional structure.
yeah,
Right. So basically, you're saying like the set of things that this thing can do is all that this thing is, but secretly, actually, there's also something that's not just the set of things that the thing can do. And I'm going to change that so that I fundamentally change the set of things that the thing should be able to do. And then I'm going to deny the previous things that it could do. Anyways,
that almost sounds like an argument of the difference of interpretation of law in terms of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law in some
yeah,
degree. Yeah,
I have a, I,
we don't have to go
there
down
are a
that
lot
rabbit
of,
hole, but this is an
no,
observation
no,
I made
it's,
years
yeah, right.
ago.
That's, I don't, there are a
Yeah,
lot of problems with the notion of law.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't want
but
to lose ourselves in. But yeah, let's keep going
yeah,
so I think you want to actually um, sketch your conception of ethics so that we can start to talk about what it means to have an objective one, right?
yeah, and I think that part of the notion that something that's important is this idea of one's subjective freedom and entering into a contract. And so that act
Mm.
of betrayal is saying something like, I have I have declared myself as a referee, and I am the referee of a sanctioned referee, and my only job
Oh, sure. Yeah.
is to act out the rules of this fight. To
You mean like
officiate this
enforce
fight.
them?
The
Yeah,
enforce
yeah.
yeah, the enforce the rule of the fight as they're been deemed by the commission that's given me power, and then you're going in there
Yep.
and changing the outcome of the fight so that you can win bets. That's
Yeah,
like,
sure.
yeah, and so that's a pure violation of the contract. So this starts getting into the idea of ethics. And so whenever we're trying to create it's like think about those eternal spirits or those eternal modes of being that can be embodied, and
Mhm.
then think about the idea of we are all going to come together and try to pull that thing from the eternal and manifest it physically. And to do so, we're all going to agree on a set of rules. And this is the idea of
Uh,
this, or a set of behaviors or a set of modes of
yeah.
being.
So, I just I want to modify that slightly because it makes it sound like we're the ones that are building the rules. Um, and I suppose in a sense that's true, but if you're really grappling with something that's transcendental or something that is eternal, then you don't really get to choose what the rules are.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I agree
Like the
completely.
rules are inherent to the thing.
Yep.
Like we just agree on how to express them right now, right? Like so you and I can come together. I mean, because like for example, language literally evolves over time, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if I want to phrase the First Amendment, right? But if we try to communicate what the First Amendment of the United States Constitution is to somebody was alive 3,000 years ago in like Jerusalem, we
Hmm.
would literally need to change the phrasing. I mean, we would
Yeah.
literally need to change the language,
Yeah.
right? But it doesn't it that doesn't nullify or transform the fundamental idea, right?
Hmm.
Because like the the thing that the essence that makes that conceptualization what it is and not something else
Yeah.
cannot change, because as soon as that changes, then it becomes literally a different conception.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is independent of language or particular expression. All that the language or the expression do is they give symbolic structure to that thing here now so that we can deal with them with we can access them or deal with them with respect to the tools that we are used to dealing with.
Yeah. It's almost like your goal is to actually to do a pure algebraic or unitary transformation. Like it's like you want to do a
Well, it
transformation.
doesn't necessarily mean that the transformation like a bijection or an isomorphism,
Mm,
right? What you have to worry
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah,
the degree to which a given society's psyche is sufficiently differentiated,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah. Okay, yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, but these are details again. But like,
Mm.
I mean, I just want to keep emphasizing this.
Yeah, no, I agree it comes because you're trying to emphasize the point that to enter into this contract, there's a degree to which you need to sacrifice or submit to the thing that you're trying to
Yeah,
manifest.
and it's not necessarily the case that we just make it up.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And not only do I think that it's not necessarily the case that we just make it up, I genuinely believe that we don't.
yeah.
Like, I mean, I really think that it's much more like divine revelation.
Hmm.
Like, I think that that's really what it is. It's something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with that, and that's something we can get into in another episode. But I do think it's something like, yeah, a divine revelation of coming to know. Like it's like, oh yeah, someone's spoken to you, and you come to realize
Yes,
deeply, like,
yes,
oh, this is
yes,
what it is.
yes,
And this, yeah, yeah.
yes, yes, yes. This
Um,
is like when people tell me something like mathematics is made up, like we make mathematics up. I'm like, I've never heard a stupider thought in my life. Like, have you done mathematics? There's
yeah,
literally no way I would ever characterize my experience in realizing the truth or the validity of a theorem as me making that up. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think that any mathematician would ever agree to that unless he's very cynical.
Yes, and I think everyone should hear in the audience that this is the spirit of mathematics speaking through Ryan very passionately at the moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is that spirit. So, so yeah, so where are we at? So, back to the,
I
yeah,
assume
so,
you want to
huh?
define the notion of ethic, I suppose.
So let's set it up. So the thing that I've been trying to establish, hopefully I've done it successfully, that was done in the previous episode, is the idea of shared identity, coming together to create the spirit, which requires this submission, which requires this, um, uh, sacrificing of your personal freedom to be in line with something else that you want to embody. And so when you do that as a group, say just like to become a citizen of a nation, or like the idea of a social contract, to enter into a social contract, you give up some of your personal sovereignty so that you can be, so that you can create the spirit of a group. So in this sense, the spirit that is embodied by everyone who's entered into the contract, um, the spirit that's embodied by everyone who into the contract, what's it? It's the shared spirit. uh let's see.
Well,
Like I said, like I
I
said, yeah.
suppose what you want to say is maybe something like when we come into the to form the identity that's bigger than us,
Yes.
and we enter into a social or group setting in order to do that, then we are thinking about the notion of ethic as subject to the constraint of the particular identity that we are considering. The set of behaviors which are appropriate are those behaviors which maximize the valid expression of that identity within the context of the group.
Yes. And then when you do that, then you are, saying that is one of my identities. Like that is,
Yes.
yes, I am that spirit. And this is what we established in the previous episode. And so now that you have this notion of group and individual, so okay, so now I'm back on track. Group and individual, macro identity, group identity, micro identity, individual identity. Because if Brian and I are both mathematicians, then that is one of our group identities. But there's all this extra data, all these other micro identities that point to Ryan instead of me. And so there's an individual identity. And so that group identity is made up of a collection of individuals. So then the idea of ethics, is to try to maximize group, identity, or to try to maximize group identity or group power, while also maximizing individual identity or individual power. So it's like I'm trying to maximize, like, if I want to establish something like a strong group identity, then I can, and maximize that. Then it's like, okay, everyone does this. there's no freedom. Everyone does this. You have no identity outside of the group. So everything you do is a demand on you by the group. But if you wanted to maximize individual freedom, then it's like then you would say, okay, the group desires this group thing. None of that matters. Everything is about what you want, your subjective feeling. So that would be maximizing individual power or freedom. And so when you're trying to maximize both of those at the same time, it really is something like trying to uh, take two polar opposites and make them simultaneously manifested at once. Um, and which
So
is,
maybe
huh?
maybe you should say something about why you would expect there to be a solution to that process,
Yeah.
right?
Oh man.
Because uh, the sketch that you just posed before us suggests that uh, my individuality and my group identity are opposed so strongly that in any effort to find a compromise between the two of them necessarily means um, that I have to subordinate one to the other.
Yes. Yes.
Right. But your assertion or your definition of ethic requires that those two, that a balance be found between a balance be found between these two things,
Yeah.
and in such a way that you don't lose one or the other. Or in
Yeah.
other
And
words, the key properties of both have to enter into the compromise.
yes, and this is the idea of free will. So anyone who enters into this compromise is something like you're
Right.
doing it of your own free will. So it's
Mhm.
respecting the
Okay, good.
free will of the individuals. So what that does then is it makes it to where each individual can maximize their own freedom. It's like what are the minimum constraints necessary that we need so that we can come together and make a cohesive group such
Mhm.
that the spirit that is emerged from our collective has maximum degrees of freedom to enact and behave while still maintaining the spirit that we're trying to
Good.
embody. And
Yeah, good.
so, yes, and so what that does is it's this idea of trying to respect everyone's free will so that they can manifest their version of the
Mhm.
spirit
Good.
that's most unique to them to actually truly come together and create the spirit of the whole thing.
Yeah, but so good. So there are two things that I want to say. The first thing is I think that the outline that you put there is spot on. But again, let us emphasize that the embodiment of the spirit always imposes rules on whoever chooses to submit to it, so that
Yes.
it's not purely arbitrary.
Yes.
And so there is the possibility of construction of the group per se, right? Because if it were purely arbitrary and you maximize the free will of each individual in
Yep.
manifesting the particular spirit,
Yes.
then there is no spirit, right? Because
Yes.
everybody does whatever,
Exactly.
like arbitrarily.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
There's no coherence.
So
Yes.
so and the other thing that I want to say is that this is actually compatible with the Catholic understanding of faith and free will,
Mm-hmm.
in that the only, like, serving or subordinating yourself to God's will only means something because
Yes.
you
Yes.
freely engage in you freely engage in it,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And
So
that's
like you need
as yeah. As
you
I'm
need
becoming closer and closer to Christianity, this is just like baked in the cake. This is
no
hugely
the,
part
you
of it. Yeah.
need you this is and I the this is why I think, I mean, this is a different project that I'm working on that I hope to flesh out more completely at some point. I think that like the great power in the American value system and um, situating liberty as one of the core
Yep.
principles of the society means that what you're doing is you're collecting individuals together, and you're basically saying to them, it is your duty and your right to manifest the soul that God has given to you, and that it is not the right of any other individual to declare that uh, you are not allowed to manifest that which you are.
Yes.
Um, or that you need to manifest something other than that which you are.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes,
And
this is
but this
very,
isn't
yeah,
this isn't like hedonistic, undisciplined, toddler like manifestation of self. No, I mean it's a
yeah.
disciplined, controlled, rigorous understanding of who I am and the expression of that thing. Right. So there's a lot of responsibility in it. But
Mm.
like I think having that like that freedom is absolutely essential, because in the absence of that, the identity that you are trying to express does not is not allowed to be expressed in its fullest manner.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
So if you try to truncate or limit, like, so imagine there's a set of valid behaviors associated with a particular identity.
Hmm.
If some individual comes along and says actually only a subset of those
Yes,
behaviors are
yes, yes,
legitimately valid,
yes.
then what you're doing is you're inherently sterilizing the life of the identity itself,
Yep.
because you're limiting the ways in which it's supposed to express itself.
Yes, exactly.
This doesn't mean that it expresses itself in all possible ways. It means that it
Yep.
expresses itself in all possible ways that are compatible with
Consistent.
its nature.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yes,
And so
yes,
in the absence of that freedom, then what happens is that like things that are appropriate to it are not
yes.
expressed,
Yep.
and an injustice is done towards it
Yes.
because you're basically nullifying its nature.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, you can even think about this in terms of computation. So one of my reasons why I'm pretty against communism, and I actually see it as a deeply evil system of thought,
Yep.
is this idea of it's this idea of at the core of like a free market capitalist society that's functioning properly. You know, the core idea, whether it's corrupted or not, but the core idea is something like I have a thing, you want the thing, and we have the freedom to exchange that thing.
Right.
And so what that does is it increases computational freedom or computational power, because what it allows is for whenever there's a need, then any individual can come and choose to fill that need, which means they deal with all the logistics necessary to provide for that need. And then get rewarded by being able to get capital and gain capital, rewarded for the need that they're providing, which means that what that does is it encourages everyone to seek out what you're saying, the thing that speaks most to them, and then provide that as a benefit for the group and work out the logistics of it. But if you come along and you suddenly say, okay, these set of actions aren't allowed, like owning means of production, you're not allowed to own a business, cut. So then you're taking all the degrees of freedom that would have allowed an individual to fulfill a need, and you're just reducing those degrees of freedom arbitrarily. So you're literally cutting down the computational capacity of your society, and
Yeah,
that's
that's
part
right.
of the notion of it.
Yeah, that's
And
right. Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah.
and so you never want to place more constraints than necessary. You want to
Yeah,
place
that's
the
right.
minimal constraints
Yeah, that's
necessary.
right.
And so your
Yeah, that's
question
right.
is, what is the minimal constraint? And I'm saying the minimal constraint is the solution to the paradox of trying to maximize group identity and individual freedom at the same time, because you want everyone who has a free will entered into the group to think that is me. I'm fully faithful to that thing. That is me. I obey it,
Yep.
and I want to obey the rule that allows me to claim its identity. But
Yep.
you also want to have your ability to express yourself to your maximum
Yeah, yeah.
maximum
Yeah.
degree.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think so this I think does a really good job of fleshing out the solution to the paradox in the context of a particular identity, but maybe we want to pass to the abstraction and talk about how we solve this problem in general.
Yes. Yes.
And go ahead.
Yes. And so I think the solution to the paradox, as I've stated in the episode Made in the Image of God principle, is that it is the idea that we are made in the image of God, or the namaste principle. So it exists in both Eastern and Western religions, the namaste principle, or the made in the image of God principle. And it's Jesus' first command and Jesus' second command. I think that those three things together actually create the objective truth of ethics. And what it does is it first establishes this I
So so
I'm sorry.
so uh let me modify what you said just a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that you're saying you think that it creates the objective truth of ethics, but what I would say is that actually I think I think what it does is it gives an expression to um, the universalization of ethics, right? So it's valid for all possible identities in
Yes,
all
yes,
possible
yes, yes,
circumstances.
yes, exactly, exactly, exactly. And in
Yeah.
fact, what I'm claiming is that,
But and
um,
only religious data can ever do that. Like the reason the thing that makes religious data or the thing that makes these particular things exceptional is that uh like whenever you want to make these universalized claims, particularly about behavior and things like that, it needs to be associated basically with God.
with the
Like,
eternal. Yes,
yeah,
it's the difference between the worldly, and, or it's the difference between the eternal and the worldly, the profane and the eternal, or the impermanent from the Buddhist perspective, the impermanent and that which is not impermanent. And so, in both Buddhism and Christianity, there's a strong emphasis
yeah,
on the
that's right.
difference between that what comes into existence, lives and dies, and you comes into existence and lives and dies, and that which is always eternal. And
Yeah.
so, this idea of this ethic, as you described it, one of its necessary conditions is to be universally applicable for all identities for all time, means
Yep.
that it's always true under all circumstances. And in fact, if you then even go deeper and start understanding that the idea of time is associated with, you start thinking about time in terms of perceptions. And so you think about the capacity for a perception. Um, well, anyway, I don't know if I kind of screwed that up, but at the very least, I think that it is the case that for any identity to be formed, these things are going to have to be true, even if you're doing them for yourself when you're trying to align oneself, like the community of spirits that exists within oneself, versus
Mm.
trying to do that outwardly in terms of a community made up of individuals. I think it's also true from all the way down into the internalized individual out to the group as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So you mentioned that you think
you have to start off with the principle that we're all made in the image of God.
yeah, no, but you mentioned that you think that Jesus's two commands are the sufficient modifiers to the principle that we're made in the image of God solves
Yes,
the paradox. So maybe you want to flesh
explain
that out
that.
a little bit more.
Yeah. So first, the idea that we're made in the image of God is the idea of trying to establish the objective glue that glues together a group to form an identity, a tribe, a religious group, or like we said, in all circumstances of trying to form a shared identity. There has to be, like, you think of this. So think of these macro identities as lowercase g gods. And so think of that as God. So start that off as a lowercase g God. And whenever anyone rallies around it, we all want to be scientists or whatever, everyone rallies around it, then you are saying that we are all made in the image of that thing. So we're all made in the image of that spirit. And and so what it does is it establishes the truth of the divine in everybody while not making it exclusive to any one person. So this is the degree to which the
Hold on.
yeah.
So if you're talking about a lowercase g God, you're when you say the divine, you another word that you might substitute for that would also be like establishes that they can commune with something that's transcendental.
Yes.
Okay, all
Yes.
right, good, good, good.
Um yeah, well yeah, it's I would think of it as like there's a thing here, like a some sort of source, like a magic, like a glowing blue source,
Yeah,
and
I
then everyone
understand.
is around it, and then everyone's connected. It's like
Yeah,
attached
I
to that
understand.
source.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. I understand. Yep.
So and one of the natures of the divine of one of the natures of the divine is the capacity to have free will. I think that it's the capacity to be able to choose. It's the capacity to have freedom. It's the subjective freedom. So I'm
Mm.
associating the subjective freedom with the divine. It's like the true sovereign. Like God has the true sovereign, and so this being made in the image of God means that everybody has a freedom to choose and act and behave. And so once you have this idea that everyone who has entered into the contract has done so of their own free will, and even though they've done that, they've given up some of their subjective freedom, but they still have free will. They still have freedom. And that
Yeah,
needs
that's right.
to and so that divine thing is like telling is saying something like, okay, everyone here is divine, everyone's
Yeah.
equal in the sense that we mentioned in the previous episode, and everyone has free will or the capacity to choose and make their own decisions. So you start off with that. Then you
Yeah, but
go
we
in.
all we all agree to, so it's like we all agree to abide by the rules that characterize this transcendental thing we're all staying in relation to. But other than those constraints, we agree that we are totally free to act.
Yes, yes, yes. You,
Right.
your divine essence means that I see that in you, and I have, and so this goes into Jesus' first principle. So now it's like, okay, now love God with all your mind, heart, and soul. Like it's like this. And maybe I'm not saying it exactly right, but it's essentially that,
Yeah.
love
Yep.
God with
Yep.
every bit of your being. So
Yeah.
now it's
Yep.
like, okay, well, if everyone in this group has the divine essence of God, then that means I have to love them in that same way. I have to revere that essence, no matter where I see it, no matter where it manifests, and I need to love it with all of my heart, mind, and soul.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that that's really the second piece, right? The first piece is that you don't, when you enter into a relationship with the thing, you don't try to corrupt it by forcing it to your own subjective desires. You willfully submit in a way that you allow its principles and its rules to be expressed through you.
Yes, yes, yes,
Right.
yes, and
So,
yeah. No, go ahead.
right. And so then when you start to go and act on its expression in the concrete forms of the individuals who have also entered into communion with it,
Hmm.
that's where loving your neighbor as yourself.
Well, that's the third part. I'm saying the first part is a prerequisite to the second command.
That's definitely true. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
definitely true.
So the first command is love God, above, basically place God above anything else. Um, which means that it's saying something like you don't have the right to, like, because if you start to try to control the free will, the essence of God in others, then you're elevating your free will, your divine essence above them. But
Mhm.
because they have the essence of God, you are elevating yourself above God. You
Yeah,
have a God complex. Like, in
yeah,
other words, the foundation of ethics that I'm establishing is the idea that you have to respect the other people. You don't have the right to control them or dominate them. And I think that anything else outside of this is going to expose someone's desire to control someone
mhm,
without use of justified force. Because then, if you're
mhm,
using force, my question is, on what authority do you have to use that force? On what authority do you have to use that force? Because God gives authority for judgment for when force is allowed. Which is to say, someone is becoming a deceiver and they're corrupting and they're trying to kill people and they're trying to. It's like, okay, well, I mean, I'm not trying to hurt you, but you are coming to corrupt and kill and
mhm,
deceive. It's like I have no
mhm,
choice but to use force. You have
mhm,
been judged
mhm,
by
mhm,
God. So
mhm,
whenever
mhm,
anyone tries to establish the use of force to control someone else's divine free will, on what authority do you have that? And you better have a damn good answer. So and so this is the idea of the first part. And then once you have this love of God that has been elevated and everyone has that, now you see your neighbor as yourself. And then when you do that, that reinforces the identity that came into existence, that you've come into existence. And I'm saying, when I say lowercase g God, I'm saying um any identity that's constructed is going to have to have this nature, lest you allow for corruption and deceit to threaten its existence as it's been manifested into the world through all the data that's been collected on it and all the people who store the memory of that spirit in them, such that they can enact its will and create in a way such that when you observe someone behaving in that way, you go, oh, that person is a scientist. And I would definitely, I think that this is something like the global minimum. It's the solution to the paradox, and anything that attempts to perturb it will reveal itself to be a deceiver in some way. And I
mhm.
challenge anyone to attempt to perturb this from its from the made in God image and Jesus' first and second command. I really, I try it. I want to see. what you come up with.
I think so. I maybe maybe a related interesting observation or sort of brief sidetrack is if you do or you engage in this process naively, you necessarily make yourself vulnerable to somebody who could deceive you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, so the individual who seeks to be righteous, what do you think he should do about the fact that he is engaging in something that necessarily makes him more vulnerable to to deception and villainy
Yes.
than
I've
somebody who is less willing to engage in this?
I've discussed this with so many Christians before. Well, reasonable for days than Nathan. It and you can see people. It basically it is to trust in the spirit of Christ, to trust in Christ,
Mhm.
build a
Yep.
relationship with Him, such that you don't have to walk around the world being fearful. You judge things, you have the desire to judge things as they are as much as possible. And if you are aligning yourself with the spirit of Christ, and you're purifying your perceptual faculties, so that you're not like you don't have some complex that you're avoiding to know about yourself that then leaves an opening for someone to
Yeah,
come
you
in because
become
you're
better at
unwilling.
discerning when people are trying to deceive you, for example.
Yes, yes. And the idea is then is that you open your heart to others, and if it's like if someone tries to present a clearly logically false argument to you, you're like, this you're not even good. Like, deceivers are become weaker. The more you are aligned with the truth and the more you're aligned with Christ, the weaker deceivers become, because it's like you know how logic works. You know
Well, they
for a
have
fact.
nothing. They have nothing to offer you. They have nothing to offer you, and they have nothing to take from you.
And it's
Right?
like what you
Because
said in the first episode of this season, which is, where does the evil have to lie? In the weak, in the pathetic, in the, remember, that's what you're saying. So if you're uh like, what's it, strengthening your spirit through Christ, you're not going to walk around being worried about being deceived all the time. You're going to see it. And I think that that's the solution. And you can see it in people who don't have a trusting nature. You can see them walk around and fearful. And I mentioned this in the episode All Is One.
yeah,
This same thing.
yeah, that's a good point. I think also, Christ's dictum to love your enemy is probably also relevant in this situation,
Yeah.
um, because um, I think probably the most basic thing you can do to demonstrate love for your enemy is to offer them, what would I say? It's to invite them to sit at the table. Like,
Hmm.
basically, it's something like, look, the onus is on you to um, present yourself as one who is not worthy of being trusted.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
um, now we should be careful because if you invite if you invite nine politicians into your house and they've all deceived you, and a tenth one comes, it like that doesn't mean that you should just open the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's okay to ask questions.
Well, hopefully you'd have the discernment to know when you're like, okay, this person, this, like, okay, I got the sense that I should remove myself from you. You know what I mean? Like, if you have a sense that, like,
Yeah, you should. I
you
think
don't go walking to the den of snakes if you think that you're dealing with like a level 30 snake and you're at level 15 perception right now. You're like, I sense
sure.
something deep. I'm gonna back
Yeah,
away
sure,
slowly, maybe get some
sure.
reinforcements.
I think the important thing here is that it's not that it's not that we don't allow ourselves to act upon the discernment that somebody has embodied evil. It's that despite the fact that we are continually
Hey, Murphy.
exposed to, and even possibly abused by evil. We don't allow it to corrupt.
Sorry, Murphy is down. Murphy jumped on my
No,
back. Sorry,
it's
go
okay.
ahead.
We don't allow the continual interfacing with evil to corrupt that which is within us that allows us to harmonize with other individuals who are good.
Yes, exactly, and that's exactly what you said. That was the point I was going to make when you said, "Why is it that you should be loving to your enemies?" It's because if you're not, then that hatred or negative, the negative nature or
Yeah,
evil
it
nature of
infects
that thing
you.
will infect you.
Yeah,
You stare at the void long enough, it'll stare back at you, and this is precisely what it means to be Christ-like. Like the spirit of Christ is one that can take any negativity, any evil, any sin, and purify it, never
yeah,
corrupted. And because if you ever interact with someone who is just mired in sin and they're like they're lying and they're deceitful and they're doing all these things, it can. Oh, Murphy. Yeah, his ear. He need to take him to the vet. Um. Uh. Um. Then you can look at that and it starts to corrupt you. It's like, why are they being like that? It's actually so easy to get angry at someone else for messing up, to not be who they're supposed to be, and like watching it, and then you start judging them, and it's so easy for people to be corrupted. And this is why
yeah,
when I see people who are trying to fix a system that has corruption in it, whether or not they're a good enough person, or whether or not they have enough gratitude to take on that evil without it corrupting them, and the degree to which
yeah.
they are filled by the slightest amount of negative or imperfection is the degree to which it's like it's telling you about the depth of their spirit
Yeah.
and the ability for them to, yeah, like their
It's like
motivations are not
endure and
pure.
overcome. Yeah,
Yes,
right, exactly.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um, yeah, and so
I think we hit all the things that you were like that I think actually outlines the argument quite well, right? So
yes. Well, I do want to do one
yeah.
more thing, which is I want to revisit the conversation we had in the first episode of this season, talking
Oh,
about and
okay, sure,
to
sure.
examine why it is that mode of being, which is to say, you must agree with my subjective use of a word, otherwise I'm going to damage your reputation. It's so evil.
Oh, okay, sure, sure. Yeah, sure. Yes, and you want to consider an example or an application. Yes. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
And so the thing is that I think for a lot of people, when they hear me get so upset about some of these woke ideas and claims that are made, which especially the one that's something like, unless you agree with someone's self identification, then you are immoral and then you are a bad person, such that I'm allowed to claim that you're responsible for them harming themselves. I'm allowed to claim that you're denying their existence. I'm allowed to claim
You are the
that
source of their suffering.
you are the source of their suffering,
Yeah.
you're making all of those claims, which is to say that I am purposely using the force of ruining your reputation, because now why don't we gossip? Because when you gossip about someone, you spread negative information such that that information is stored on people, so that when they interact with that person, it changes the interaction. You are literally changing their spirit based on the definition that we use in this podcast. You are literally changing their spirit. You are harming it. You are so this is the point. It's like this is the difference between meta level 0 and meta level 1. Meta level 0, I come to you and I put a gun to you and I shoot you. Okay, obviously you used force, violence. That's wrong. That's bad. Meta level 1, I'm going to gossip about you and harm your reputation. And while saying that I'm doing it for a good cause, now suddenly we can't tell that violence is happening anymore. It's like you're not understanding the nature
Well,
of
you can tell violence is happening, but it takes a long time to realize that that's what was going
it.
on.
Not only that, but it's very easy to lie. Like if you don't want to see the violence, it's way easier. If someone is going around punching people in
Oh
the
yeah,
face,
that's true.
it's
Yep.
much more difficult for you to deny what's occurred. But when someone goes around and starts harming people's reputation and saying, "Oh, I'm
Yep.
a good guy," and if you want to believe it, you can just keep telling yourself anything you want at meta level 1.
Mhm.
And so yeah, and so the idea that you're allowed to, let's break down the situation and the argument that's happening here. You're essentially saying something like there is a shared language that has words in it, and we use these words to communicate. And the degree to which these words have anything coherent, such that I can predict how they'll program you, is the degree to which we both agree on the meaning of the word. So these words have to the value of these words, the objective nature of these words comes with our agreement, which means that it's a shared set of concepts that we all have access to and we all share. So that's what we're starting off with. And then someone goes, I'm going to take these words and radically change their meaning so that they actually mean the opposite of what they were before.
Yep.
Um, and so you're like, wow, that's a huge thing you're asking for. That's a big deal. Why are you asking to do that? Oh, because there's this group of people over here that if you don't change the language, if you don't adopt my use of this language, if you don't adopt that, then these people are going to feel bad, and they're going to feel bad. So it's like, yeah, but the thing you're asking me to do is inconsistent with my relationship with these words, and in fact, it's inconsistent with the entire coherent structure of my spirit. Like when you ask me to do this, I feel like I'm lying to myself every time I do it. And you can look at Dave Chappelle's stand up, his comedy special, The Dreamer, where he uses a bit where he's talking about what's the guy's name, Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey is playing Hoffman, some comedian, something Hoffman, I can't remember what his name is, and so he's
Oh, do you mean Andy Kaufman?
Andy Kaufman, yes, and
Yeah.
he's playing Andy Kaufman in the movie Man on the Moon, I think.
Yeah. 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 Yep.
And
Yep.
and so in the skit, he's saying that he met Jim Carrey while he was playing that role, and Jim Carrey completely started having people call him that to the point where on set someone's like, don't call him Jim, he's Andy, don't call him Jim. And so Dave is saying like, I was so amazing to see someone and the depth of their craft creating. He's like, but I was upset because this entire time they're telling me to call him Andy, and I know that it's Jim. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that's the way these people make me feel. You know, the those who made, I guess like, you can't be named them or whatever, but you know, the certain set of people, and so he's saying this is
The
how
words.
and so it's like that expression that he gave in that stand up is exactly my feeling and exactly the feeling of so many people when you talk to them. It's like, I know that this is not what it says it is. And every time you ask me to do it, it feels like I am lying. You're telling me to lie to the core of my being. And that's even outside of the logical structure of the language of these words that they're proposing, that when you analyze them logically, you understand that they're based on words that have no capacity to point at one concept versus another concept. And that's another argument we'll make later. But it's like
Right. Right. Right.
my
Right.
spirit of the
Right.
rational, my identity of the rational is telling me that you're asking me to fundamentally do something
Yeah.
irrational
Right.
to make these people,
Right.
to make a group of people feel
Right.
better, which
Right.
is to
Right.
say that you're telling me to sacrifice my identity to validate their identity. So then the
Right.
question is, what about me? What about my feelings? Why is it that my identity and my feelings should be subordinated
Well,
to
because
this group?
they sneak in a hierarchy, right? They sneak in a hierarchy, and you fall somewhere in the hierarchy which is beneath.
But the whole point at the end of the day is the idea that I view this as nothing more than a use of force.
That's right. Yeah.
It's a use of force to try to dominate my feelings and my spirit to accommodate the feelings of somebody else. And when you ask people, it's like okay, well, let's take Rachel Dolezal, the woman who identified as black, the white woman who identified as black, and then when she said that, everyone just pilloried her into oblivion. It's like, okay, well, if a white person comes and tells me they're black and says that if I don't agree, then they're going to harm themselves or something like that, it's like, do I have to do it then? If someone comes to me and says that they're funny and I don't think they're funny and I don't affirm that, it's like, do I have to do it then? Like, how does this work? Like, how do we discern like when something immoral has happened? How does this
Yep.
moral structure that you're claiming that something immoral has occurred? So you're claiming the spirit of the objective eternal spirit of morals and ethics. So you're saying like, I am going to harm your reputation on the authority that you're being immoral or unethical. So then it's like, okay, well, what's your argument? And it's like, well, I just think that so what's your argument that says
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's allowed for these people? But what about all these other people who can
Yeah.
make the same
Yep.
claim? Like,
Yep. 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 Yep.
and
Yeah.
then go back to the first episode of the first season. It's just like, none of this makes any sense, and the
Yep.
fact that it has so much power is baffling beyond belief. And
Well,
what it's
so um, I don't think, I actually don't think that it's that unintelligible. I think, I think that the degree to which people have been deceived is actually a testimony to the degree to which they were trying to live in harmony with themselves and those around them, which
mm,
means the degree to which they were trying to behave ethically,
yes, yes, yes,
specifically
yes,
in the
yes,
sense that we've outlined here,
yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes.
The reason why it was allowed to occur was because there is a component of the ethic that we actually haven't necessarily touched on yet, which maybe we should flesh out a little bit more. But
Oh, we have some
I
time
don't think.
if you want to flesh it out. If I mean,
No, no.
depending
I
on
mean, I think I have to think about it some more. But basically, it has to do with when you observe a violation, what do you do? And I think that the answer is something like you need to be strong enough to say no.
yes, 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 yes,
Um,
and that strength
but
comes.
that's but
Yeah,
that's
sorry.
like a really that's something really difficult because as soon as you say no, uh, like that thing is going to turn violent, not
Mm.
necessarily physically violent, but it's going to rear its head in a way that's like, okay, like, yep, here comes the this is the demon or
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
the dragon. It's
yeah,
going to come,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And what people do is they threaten to destroy not you, they threaten to destroy your reputation,
Yep.
your livelihood, your children, your family, their capacity to make money, right?
Yeah.
So like that's how evil and violent this thing has become, is that it tries to totally demolish everything about you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when this first started, like back in 2016 and 2017,
Yeah.
uh like it's amazing that anybody stood up against it,
Yeah. 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 Well,
because I mean, like, if someone said to you, yeah, like, so I'm going to come to you, and if you don't agree with what I'm going to do, then I'm literally going to remove everything from your life. Like you think Job's life was bad, yours is going to be 10 times worse, 100 times
mhm.
worse.
Yeah. Well, I, I I don't know. Job's life was pretty bad, huh?
Yeah,
but but um but yeah, I think at the core of it is, to me, what's happening is so nakedly
immoral.
unethical and immoral
Yeah,
and logically irrational. And that will be another argument where I can actually lay down from an information theoretic point of view why the language they're asking you to adopt is is fundamentally at odds with how language works as we've described it in this podcast, and that it actually doesn't have the capacity to create an object that allows you to discern what,
hmm,
to create a demarcation to say something that
yeah,
this
yeah,
is consistent with information or it's
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so in other words, what I'm noticing is that someone comes to me and tells me to adopt an illogical structure into my language, and there's an intimate relationship between your language and your spirit. So you're asking me to incorporate within my spirit something that is purely illogical, so that so that I so you're asking me to do that first, and then you're asking me to do it to validate the identities of other people while telling me that I need to invalidate my identity. And you're saying you're doing this out of compassion when there's clearly no compassion for me or my
yeah, yeah,
feelings.
yep, yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's like every single
yeah,
aspect of
because
it
it's
is
really about,
corrupted.
wow, yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, because at the end of the day, you're saying something like, I'm saying this on the authority of these people's feelings. So then it's like, well, what about my feelings? And it's like, well, your feelings don't count, but you're claiming that this is coming from a compassion and desire for like your compassion for other people's
yeah,
feelings,
yeah,
but you're
yep,
asking me to sacrifice my own feelings at the
yep,
same time. So it's like,
yep,
clearly the thing that you're claiming is the motivation of your action is
yep,
not the motivation of your
yep,
action.
yep,
And and
yep,
so and so and so when you look at a lot of these ideas that are surrounding this wokeness, it's almost all of them are based off of things that are fundamentally not consistent with things like morals, ethics, or logic, and then
yep,
enforced through coercion and
yep,
and threatening of one's reputation and spirit. And it's just
Yeah.
like, this is just all evil all the way down. I don't see any good in it.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I think so. This is why I've thought for a very long time now that basically what this is, what we're living through right now, is the concrete expression of um, of the of the archetype of the negative feminine. Like I think
Mm,
that's basically what this is.
yeah.
Um, so I mean, I think that actually puts a really a very solid
Good cap.
point.
Mm.
Yeah. So but maybe we just summarize that really
Hey,
quickly. So
Murphy.
like the
Murphy.
so you know the key idea here is that
Hey, buddy.
this in this particular example, the reason why this is unethical is because what it attempts to do is obfuscate the coherence or seeks to not undermine but rather make incoherent the natural relationship between one's individual conception of being and one's lived expression of being as it's made an effort to subordinate itself to a transcendental thing
Mm-hmm.
or the universe of transcendental things, right? So, like, basically, it's an effort to sever the individual from God,
Yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes.
And that's fundamentally why it's wrong.
And that's the nature of sin.
So, yeah,
Oh, how
right,
about
exactly.
that?
Yeah.
Wait, and one thing, what? Murphy, shush. Come on, buddy. Hey, shush. Um, and that is the nature of sin. And this is the nature that, when infested within an identity, creates this corruption that
Yeah.
threatens the existence of it in its life, which leads to death, which is the nature of sin. And part of what, one last thing I want to wrap up is that in this act of being citizens, the question is, what do I owe? Oh, hold on, buddy. Hold on. The question is, what do I owe the other citizens? What do I owe my, like basically your ethics comes down to, what relationship do you have? I have a child. What is my responsibility to my child? I have my wife. What, and under, like, I know for a fact, another reason why I know this is so unethical is I know for a fact that if a society adopts the idea that you must do this thing because I declare it's moral, otherwise, if you don't agree with me, I have the right to use force on you. That mode of being, when injected into any group, is going to create death and chaos and fighting
Hmm.
and war.
Yeah, that's right.
If you
Yeah.
try to enact it out, it will create death.
Yep.
And you know for a fact that when you enter into a relationship with your spouse, that you just can't come and start demanding that they bow to your will and do everything you say. You
Yep.
can't do that. I can't go to my neighbor and do that. Like,
Yep.
so the nature of what you can ask of somebody depends on your relationship with them. And within the citizenry, especially within the West, within that citizenry, no one has the right to tell you to use specific words. That's insane. That's madness. And so that's where I want to end it on, is that this is such a clear violation of what you owe me and what I owe you, because I know for a fact that I can't do this to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think that's a great place to end it.
All right, man. Well, thanks for joining me, Ryan. So far, I am very happy with this series of this season. I'm very glad that I came to meet you, and that you were able to help me facilitate this idea and this message. And when um when we met, I remember you were focused on the concept of evil. Like, hey, man, so am I. Let's do some podcast about it, and here we are. So
Yeah. Well, the
I
pleasure
want
is
to
mine.
yeah, man. So I want to thank Ryan for being here, and for everybody else, stay turtling, my friends. Peace.